Okay, so I've got a very simple setup here for my bathing space, and obviously a long way to go still, but even at this stage I can start to look at the setup for my materials and maybe start to make some of the important materials that I want for my design. And so I'm going to start with the wall, and so there you can see I've selected my wall, and I'm going to go to Edit Type in Properties, and then before I change the wall type, I'm going to use Duplicate. And that's probably the key thing to take from this. When you're making new materials, particularly for things like walls, but also floors, ceilings, roofs, duplicate before you can make your change. So it's called generic 100mm wall. I'm going to click Duplicate. I need to give a new name, and I'm going to call it Timber Panel. Timber panelled 100mm wall, just for me to know what it is, and then click OK. Right, so if I didn't do that, then all of the other walls that are called generic 100mm walls, in other words these two that you can see here, they'd change as well, and I don't want that. So I've had to duplicate for my new material. That's fine. Now I'm going to click Edit to change the structure. So that's how you set the material for the wall. You click Edit there, and then you'll see the material. With this wall, we've only got, well, how many layers have we got, do you think? If you say 3, you're actually right, because there are 2 boundaries, but we've only got 1 physical layer. So this boundary doesn't have a thickness. That's just a separator. So even though we've got the 3 technically, really we've only got the 1 layer we have to worry about, which makes it nice and easy. So if I click Preview there, you can see that's the 1 layer. So the 1 layer that I have is set to Finish. That's the name of the material. So I'm going to click there, and I can click Browse to then change that finished material to something else. So you can see there, I've already made some changes to my finished material, and that's something I would never recommend. Finish is a material that you'll have in most of your projects, and I like to use that almost as a default. In other words, like a plain white or something. So I'm going to go and fix that first before I make any changes. You probably won't have to do this, but just want to make it better. So, okay, so now I want to make a new material. And a good technique for that is to find a material that's close to what you want. And so if you scroll through the list there, you'll see that you have all these materials that are set up in your project. So scrolling down to the bottom, I know that I'll have some wood materials. So we've got a couple. Wood sheathing chipboard is probably close enough to what I want. And don't worry, if you don't find anything that's close to what you want, you can use almost anything. You just might have to make some more changes to it. So I've got wood sheathing chipboard, which is obviously a particle board material. And to make my new material, I'm going to right-click on that and then duplicate again. So duplicated once for the wall. Now I'm duplicating a second time for the material. And so I'll call this wood panels. Okay, so now is the confusing bit. Now I've got to go to Appearance, and I've got to duplicate that as well. Now, it is for a reason. It's not, they didn't just do it to make it hard for you. The reason it's like this is, again, for bigger projects than you'll be working on. So maybe just try to remember that. Usually you'll need to duplicate 3 times, and then you shouldn't have too many problems. So here, duplicate. Oh, that's if you want to get some different settings to come up. Yeah. So there, actually it's good to notice that. So there you can see it's wood. That's the type of material. If I chose duplicate as generic, it would turn that wood material into what's called a generic material. And that will give me a lot more settings than I've got there with wood. So these materials, under appearance, they use what's called a template. So this is a wood template. And so it's basically giving me settings or options that would make sense for a wood material. And so you can see here, these options, they relate to wood, the finish. Right? So glossy varnished, semi-gloss, satin varnish, unfinished. Right? They're the types of finish you could have for wood usually. Then used for furniture or flooring. Often you might want to use this for walls, and so their flooring is very similar to walls. Then the relief pattern, if I click on the little arrow next to it, you'll see. Oh, they just don't assume, they don't think that you use walls as often, but it actually doesn't matter that much. For furniture and flooring, it even doesn't make much difference, but again, flooring behaves basically like you'd want it for walls. It's to do with the way the mapping is done, and we'll have a look at mapping in a moment. So there, oh yeah, the final thing I want to show you is the relief pattern. So to see all the options, we're just going to click on the arrow next to it, and you can see it gives you this option based on wood grain. So again, that's a special option that we have because this is a wood material. If it wasn't wood, then we'd have to do the relief differently. And the relief actually, just so you can see it, it's a bit hard to see on this one. So I might put in, I'll put in a custom one just so you can see what relief is. So unless you're going to use one of those that I showed you, you don't have to use this. It's just so you can see what a relief is. So I don't have to describe it. And so I should have some maps here. Where's my, here we go. So I've got these images set up, again, for the relief, or the name that this folder's got is actually probably more meaningful. You can see there it's called bump. So relief basically is the same as bump. And so there, I'm just going to check the size. What is it? It's probably really small. Yeah, so let's make it a bit bigger. Oh. There we go. There we are. So can you see how now I've got this brick pattern that's recessed into that material? So that can surprise a lot of people. I know I was surprised the first time I saw this, about 25 years ago. So what it's doing is giving a 3D effect, right, built into the material. And that's why you often don't have to model those details. So if you're thinking when you want to do a brick wall that you need to model things like brickwork to get it to look 3D, the answer is that you don't have to do that. It does it in the material, and it is a 3D effect. So I always think that's interesting when you see things like relief. Here I'll make it a bit more prominent so you can see there we can make it look really 3D.
But you wouldn't usually use the masonry relief.
Oh, no. For timber, so yeah, so if it's based on wood grain, well actually I can see it a bit there, so you can see I've got a bit more texture because I dragged this amount up. But because it's a more subtle effect, it's harder to appreciate what that relief's doing, so I just wanted to show you one that stood out a bit more. But yeah, for wood, I would normally just leave that as based on wood grain. So, where does the wood grain come from? So it's back up the top here, you've got this image. So remember those image files I showed you earlier? If we click on the name there, the file name, that takes you straight to the Autodesk material library. And you get this when you install Revit, you'll have this on your computer. So scrolling through these images, you can see we've got again, all these different image files. This isn't the one I showed you on the P drive, this is the one that comes with Revit. And I know if I go down to the bottom, there are lots of wood textures there. It's alphabetical, so woods tend to be at the end. So there we are, so wood, plastic, it's a funny one. They've called it plastics because I think this is actually set up for a laminate, but they're fine. Laminates are made by photographing real wood, so it looks the same for us as real wood. So I've double clicked on it and you can see it's brought this image across with some floorboards, and that works fine for wall panelling as well. But maybe that's not what I want, so I'll click again on this name and try another one. So that one actually is doesn't have boards, so I'll go back up and find one that does have some boards, or I'll show you where some others are. If we go up higher, you'll see under F for flooring. Okay, so just going a little bit higher. Oh no, sorry, it's not flooring anymore, is it? It's finishes, sorry, finishes flooring. Crazy system, but that's how it is. Here we are, finishes, and then you've got, here we are, some flooring materials. So this hardwood one, there we are. Okay, so I've got boards that, again, are coming from an image. And again, that's the image.
And you want the boards to run the other way?
Yeah, so that's the thing. So then how do we know how big those boards are and what direction they go? So you do that by clicking on the image swatch. So we've got the name that I've been clicking on to choose the file, and then above that you can click on this image swatch and you get all the settings for that image. So I'll expand this and you can see that we've got a few different options. Don't worry about this first option for the position, you shouldn't need to change that. But then just below that, that's where you've got the angle. So you can change it if you want it running the other way. We can make that 90. If you want it running across. And then go the other way. Or any angle in between. 45 might look interesting. Whatever you want.
Sample size, is that where you would put what your actual material is?
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And so you can work this out exactly, because you should know how big you want those boards to be in real life. And there's no trick with scaling or anything like that. You just need to think about the real world size. So how big would you want, how wide would you want a board like this to be, generally? If it's for timber panelling, like, you know, shiplap boards or even weatherboards. Yeah, 90 or even 100. Yeah, 90 is actually not far off the smaller ones, but yeah, 100's a nice round number, so that's what I'll use. Maybe even 150 you could go up to, but 100 probably is close enough. So, say it was brickwork, you would know the size of a brick. Right, so you know they're 75 roughly without the mortar. So you need to think about the real size and then look at the image, and we can see we've got what are between the dimensions here, how many boards are there? Well, I don't know, but I can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 boards. And it's not just what you can see, it's only between these two measurements. Okay, that I've got 18 boards, that's actually the image. Do you know why it shows you a little bit more? Just so you can see what happens when it repeats. So that, again, that idea of seamless textures. So the extra boards on the side, they're coming from the beginning. Okay, so again, we've got 18 boards between the two dimensions. I know that I want my boards to be 100 mil each, so it's 1800. That's my size. Okay, now unfortunately, when this is locked, those two measurements should change, but unfortunately, it doesn't always work. So I'm just going to manually type in the same measurement for the height. That should happen without you having to unlock it normally. But yeah, just watch out for that. So over here I've just unlocked that option, but unlocked it again after changing it. So you can see there, if it changes slightly, you can see it's gone to another millimetre more. That's not going to matter. Okay, so the most important thing there is that you've got a good idea about how to work out the size your textures should be. So I'll click OK, or click Done. And that's most of the work done for that material. So on the Appearance tab, you set the way you want it to render. And that's why you use Photorealistic Textures. In other words, textures made from photos taken in the real world. But then to finish it off, I'm going to go back to the Graphics tab and now just quickly go over how to set the shading colour using this option, Use Render Appearance. So if you've done some work with materials before, you might have already used the shading option there, and you might have done that before even worrying about appearance. But I often find it's a good idea to set the appearance first, because then when you come back to graphics, you can use that option, and it'll pick up any images and basically give you an average colour. So this colour here, that brown colour, is essentially an average of all the colours in this image. But now, if I click on that colour, can you see how it's not letting me change? So to adjust it further, now I just need to turn that option off again, and then I can click on the colour. And you remember we were talking about red, green and blue? What are red, green and blue? Screen colours, yep. So why are they the colours? They're the primary colours, that's right. It's not red, yellow, blue. If you're still thinking red, yellow, blue, that's only for some things, and it's not even totally correct. But again, red, green and blue is what you should be thinking of when you're working with colour on a computer. And so there you can see we've got the RGB values, red, green and blue. But it's fine to use the colour picker here, and that's of course going to give you a red, green and blue value anyway. And then we can of course use the slider over here as well. And make the colours however you like, but always try to think about the RGB values. Again, red, green, blue. I'll give you the big spiel about primary colours later maybe, but probably already talked to you a little bit about that. Cyan, magenta, yellow, subtractive, additive, all those things. Anyhow, we'll talk to you more about that later. So for now, again, just remember red, green and blue are your primaries. Okay, and obviously now we've got that colour. So I'll come back later and go over surface patterns and cut patterns. So I'm going to leave them as they are. And I'll just click OK. And OK, OK. And then we can't see the colour change yet, but if I click to one side, I can see the colour has changed. So that's the colour I had with shading, the one that I just did. To see the texture, down on the view control bar, I've got to choose realistic. And yeah, I'm going to save it. Okay, so there we are. So now we can see that texture. It's a bit dark, so I want to go back and adjust that. So, without selecting the wall, obviously if I select the wall, I can go back the way I just have by edit type, edit, and then find the material. But I'm going to cancel that and show you a quicker way. Now that I've made that material, I can just go to the Manage tab and then go straight to Materials. That's often much faster. So then under Appearance, you can see that we've got the material showing fairly light there. That's actually pretty much what I want, but you won't always get that in your viewport. So I'm going to click on that image swatch there. Let's see. Well, the brightness is actually on 100, so that's okay. Nothing much I can do there. So I might try using the stain option. And there you can see it's gone much lighter But if I click on that colour, I can make that a bit darker. Yeah, that's it, exactly it. And I actually don't mind using these grey stains because they make the wood look a bit more natural. But sometimes you want to have a bit of colour if you're going to use stains. So here I'm going to try and get a brownish grey. Yeah, I'll show you some other good tricks later for adjusting your textures. But for now, that might be enough. So I'll click OK, and it's still not showing up very well there. So what I'll do before I take it too much further is just have a look at it in rendering. So that's what's called a real-time display. In other words, it's showing on the screen while I'm working. But if I go to render that, I'm going to make a camera view and just do a quick render. I'll set it to realistic so you can see the texture is there. Again, very dark on the screen. But remember, when you render, it will look different. So without changing anything, I shall just do it with the default settings. And I'll be sure it will be actually fairly light. There we are. So there are a lot of things go into that, the render output to getting that final colour when it renders. And there's a lot of photographic theory you need to understand to really be able to predict that. So what you might find instead is that it's easier to do that work in Photoshop. And that's the final thing I want to show you. So I'm going to go and get a texture. So I've got here an image. In fact, I'm going to get one that I use a bit more. So this cedar fence is one I use quite a bit. And I'm going to go and open with Photoshop. And most of you using Photoshop for other work? This stage, yeah, hopefully you are. Yeah. If you're not, highly recommended that you go and get a copy and get Photoshop on your own computer, in other words. And well, actually, I've never seen that before. It's just opened up part of the image. I didn't think that was even possible. So I'll just open that again. That's just a weird computer glitch. Yeah, and it's not. It's just I had an issue with the network, I think. So let's try that again. Oh, okay. That's odd. Okay, so I'm going to open up a different version of it. I've got a few copies of that. Okay, so I want to make it lighter in Photoshop. So, under Image, Adjustments, Brightness Contrast, and I'll just do it again in case you missed it. Again, Image Menu, and then under Adjustments you'll find that option there, the first one, Brightness Contrast. So I can just make that a bit brighter. And then maybe just adjust the contrast. It's not quite so overexposed. And then I'll save the file. Somewhere I can get to it. That'll do it. So now I just need to go to Materials. With the same material, go to Appearance. And then click on the name and choose Menu File. And I'm going to turn that stain option off altogether because I don't need it. I've got the brightness that I want. How much better is that? So there are lots of options with materials, but if you're using a texture like this, in other words it's a photo, then often it's easy to go into Photoshop and adjust it there. That's all I was showing you there. And so then, just to go back to materials, maybe I'll do a tile because you'll need those for your bathrooms as well, almost definitely. So maybe we'll look at the floor. So I've got a floor there. which is, again, one of the default floors. It's generic 150 mil. So that's the same floor as I've used for over here. We'll get rid of that toilet. So this floor is the same type of floor. So before I can change this floor, what do I need to do? Exactly, duplicate it. That's right. Yep, same idea. Yep. So edit type, duplicate, and I may as well give it a meaningful name. So we'll call it, yep, tile floor. That's fine. So again, edit to change the structure. We've only got the one layer there that has a material. Again, it's using that finished material. Not a problem. I can click browse there and find, well, see if I can find a material that's close to what I want. Yeah, well, that's right, they're ceiling tiles, which is very different to floor tiles, but that probably is the closest to what we want. That's okay, so I'll duplicate that. So I'm going to right-click, duplicate, and I'll call it ceramic tile. And I don't know the size, so that's all I'm going to give it. That's the name. So following the same process as before, go to Appearance. Don't forget to duplicate that before you change it. So I'll right click, and then duplicate would work, but you can see down below it's actually a generic material. So remember before I was saying you can use generic when you want to get all the settings. But we don't need all of these settings. So the other option, when you right click there, instead of choosing duplicate, you can choose replace. So they're the two choices you've got really. So with replace, you get one last thing with the libraries, and that's the appearance library. So again, this comes with Revit. When you install Revit, this will be there. And the best tip I can give you about this is that the appearance folder is better than all the others. So you've got these other folders. They're called physical materials. All the other folders have basically all these physical materials, and you don't need those. They're for other disciplines, mostly architecture, but engineering as well. So all you need is the appearance library, and it's got a lot more in it than the others anyway. So here, the appearance library folder should always be there when you're using Revit. And then if you go to ceramic, you'll see there's a tile folder, and you've got all these basic tile materials. So I'll just double click on one of them, mosaic blue maybe, that'll do. So it's hard to see, but when you double click on it, that puts it into here. Okay, so you just need to remember double click on the one you want. You can't make changes here, so don't worry about damaging it. It's read only, so you can't change that library. So I'm going to close this, and you'll see it's put that mosaic tile material into my ceramic tile. So that's it. That's all I'll do with that for now. And don't worry about the fact that it's generic. That's absolutely fine. So I will do one last thing. Back under graphics, can you see how the surface pattern is this really big tile? So all I'm going to do there is click on that swatch, and then you'll see you've got some other basic patterns, and I'll just choose one that looks like the tiles I want, so maybe the 100 mil square. So now zooming in, you can see I've got my little mosaic tiles. And so they're probably two of the most important materials for your the ones that need textures. But there's one last material I need to show you. And in some ways it's the simplest, but also it doesn't have very many settings. So I'll draw a wall, and using that toilet partition, so I know that's what I've been telling you to use, set the height there, and then location line, make that finish face interior. So I've drawn in a wall, which I now want to make glass. I've got my solid wall, and just the same as all the other examples, I'll select that wall, edit type, duplicate, and call it glass wall. Then again, edit next to structure. It's again using the finished material, that's fine, so I'll just click browse there. And so you should see that glass will be one of the materials already set up in your project. So you don't even need to make it, or even know how to make it. It's there. So without changing anything or making a new material, just click OK, OK. Remember, I did duplicate the wall, but that was all. And I've got a basic glass wall. That easy. Oh, yeah. Sure. That's a good example. Okay, so say, yeah, we want this one here. That's a good example. To be timber on the outside, but then, say, white painted on the inside. So it's not really materials, that's the wall setup, is what you'd use for that. So, but that's a good example. So what I'll start with is this same wall type. So that wall, we know, is timber both sides. So I've already made that wall type. So I'm going to select both of these walls, and now to make them the same material, I can just choose that wall type from the list. So I've got timber panelled wall already made, and if you're wondering why they make you do all of that duplicating and making new types, it's because you're going to use these things repeatedly. If you're only doing it once, you wouldn't do it that way. But it's really so that you can do these things more quickly once you need to use that same kind of wall again. But now, that's timber on both sides. So to make it, like you're saying, white on the inside, for example, I can select that wall, edit type, and again I've got to duplicate because this is a new wall type. So it's timber panelled, let's say timber panelled exterior, white interior. And then if I go to edit the structure, I'm going to insert a new layer. Okay, so at the moment we've again just got the one physical layer. So if I click insert, you'll see it'll add a new one. I'll move that down so it goes below the wood. And then I'll change the thickness to, I'll just make it 10 mil. That's the thickness of plasterboard. But then I need to make the wood panels less if I want the wall to stay the same thickness. So I could make this 90. But maybe an even better way would be to make that 10 as well. And then I can insert a new layer for the structure, for the timber studs inside the wall. Right, so if that's 10 and that's 10, and I want the wall to be 100, then I can make my studs 80. Okay,
Well,
so
why aren't you using the full boundary? Are they never used?
oh, they are. But it's more when you need to think about the structural elements. So we'll get onto that. But yeah, that's their purpose really, to define the structure. And for interiors, you often don't need to. Yeah. But we will look at that later. So there you can see my layers. So I've got the timber now. It was the whole wall before, but now it's just 10 mil on one side. On the other side, I've got the plasterboard. And then we've got this 80 mil layer in the middle. Because we're not going to see that, we don't really need to worry too much about the material. So I'm going to leave the material of that thicker part. And now I'm just going to change the material of the the plasterboard side, the one at the bottom. And remember I said I often leave that finished material as a white, because I use white all the time. And so that's already there. I can just choose it, click OK, 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 and now, well, it's still showing the timber, which means the white must be on the other side. So do you remember the trick to flip the wall? Yeah, you can do it in plan, or if you select it in 3D, you can do it there as well, but you've got to check your location line. So if I want that to flip without moving, just remember, usually you want to set the location line to wall center line, and then space, we'll flip it, and now it's got timber on that side. It is white on the inside, but why do you think it's showing grey? Pretty much, yes, the lighting. So there you can see as I orbit, notice how the colours change a little bit. So it's all to do with the lighting. And I always think that's interesting with materials, because people seem to think that, well, often at first you will think this way, they think a colour is a colour. They think, I've chosen this colour from the catalogue, that's the colour it's going to be. But I've just been looking at some colours that I specified on a house that I did, and they look much darker than what we chose out of the catalogue. And it's because that side of the building's in shadow most of the time. When it's bright and sunny, those colours look super bright, and they actually look a lot lighter than out of the catalogue. So it tells you a lot about the way colour works in the real world, because you've always got the lighting to consider, which is going to affect your colours a lot. So again, orbiting around, we can see the colours do change. But then you might have noticed on the view control bar there, you've got this option, consistent colours. So if you want to see the colour that you've set without any of that lighting, that's the option to choose.
Can you just do that again?
Oh yeah, sure. So this one here,
Yep.
and then consistent colours.
Yep.
So the one I had was shaded, which is basically consistent colours, but with that lighting effect, which is sometimes good, but can get in the way. So. Yes, sure, that's it. That's all I'm going to do with materials. If you've got any questions? No? Good, good. Thanks.